For a little while, I want to take you back to John, and we're coming to one of the great chapters in John, and almost all the chapters in John are great, but this one particularly, because in this first section, which is familiar to a lot of you, if you've been around here a long time, you've heard me talk about this passage of Scripture before, but here's the great thing about John 13. Here's the big overriding principle that we take out of it, is leading by example. Leading by example. Now, I don't know about you, but I like leaders who lead by example. I don't like somebody that says, do what I do, not what I say. I like people who just say, do what I do. Just follow my example. And you know what? That carries over in every aspect of life. When you're on the job, you know what you like? You like leaders who lead by example. You like leaders who are willing to jump in and not ask you to do anything they're not willing to do themselves. But you know what? That also carries right into the home. And we don't need to think, and most of us, all of us here that are parents, we know this. Kids are smart enough that you know what they watch with their parents? Not what they're saying, what they're doing. They want parents who lead by example. Because when we tell our kids to do one thing, when we do another, they're just looking at that and saying, it doesn't mean anything to them. Why should it mean anything to me? When we were in Sunday school this last week, we were just getting into Titus chapter 1, and we're talking about godly leadership. And out in our class in the fellowship hall, I was telling my class some of my pet peeves through all these years. Listen, I grew up a preacher's kid. I'm a preacher. My kids are preachers' kids. This is all I've ever known my entire life, and I love preachers, okay? But there are some things preachers do that drive me crazy. And a lot of it revolves around things like this. Not leading by example. Asking people to do things they're not willing to do themselves. And I've seen that down through the years. Listen, I've seen examples of great pastors who are willing, who are able, who will jump in and do and become a part of whatever they're asking everybody else to do. But then I've seen other pastors that stand back and direct traffic and tell everybody else what they need to be doing, but don't ever want to bother doing it themselves. I was talking to our class Sunday morning. I was giving them some of the more crazy examples of things that drive me nuts. And I was telling them, I said, here's one. To me, this is not leading by example. When we built this new building, one of the things that I asked for a lot of our folks to do is, especially on Sunday morning, to park around in the back, over in the grass and the gravel, and leave as many places out here. And listen, I know there's older folks and different things, and they need to park on the asphalt, and that's not a problem at all. I was talking to a lot of the younger people and saying, hey, park back here. It won't hurt you to walk on the gravel. Leave some parking places out there and do that. Well, here's one of the things that drives me nuts. I don't get to visit other churches very often because most of the time I'm here. But on the rare occasions when I do, if I go to a church, and one of the first things I see when I pull up in the parking lot is a big sign that says reserved for pastor parking, I just want to turn around and leave. That drives me crazy. Because I'm sitting there thinking, does the pastor at this church really get here so late in the moment that he needs to have a reserved spot? I mean, does he really need is he coming so late to the game every Sunday morning, Sunday night, that they have to save him a spot? You know, I hate stuff like that. I hate that kind of deal. I hate the names. I hate the titles. I hate all of that. A lot of you will remember years and years, and 27, 28 years ago, when I became the pastor, I'll never forget Miss Ruby Forbes. We were at the end of the service, and I don't know if it was my ordination or whatever it was, and Miss Ruby stood up and she said, Brother Daniel, I just want to say, a lot of us have known you since you were a little kid, but now you're our pastor. And she said some of the words, now, you know, what should we call you? And I was like, I was very young at that, you know, and my instinct was, His Eminence sounds good to me. I kind of like that one. But I never could get that to catch on for some reason. And I told her, and you know this, I told the church, I said, listen, my name is Daniel. That's who I am. When people say, Brother Harper, you know what I do? Still to this day, if I hear somebody say, hey, I turn around and look for my dad, see if he's there. I am not big on titles and privileges, and we do this. Listen, you know who we need to give all of our honor to? You know who's the only one in my mind who's worthy of all that? That's God. But of all the rest of us, we're all just sinners saved by grace, right? That's all we are. But I know people that get so caught up in that stuff. I've known churches where if you call a church and if you ask for the pastor by name, they'll say, I'm sorry, there's nobody here by that name. Unless you ask for pastor so-and-so, unless you use the word pastor, they won't even pass a phone call on to him. I want to reach through the phone and hit somebody when they do stuff like that. That is just not me. Now, you know what? If that's somebody, that's fine, but that's not me. I'm just not into all that. I love guys that lead by example, who just get down in the trenches, who help, who do, who serve. And you know why I love it so much? Because when you read the New Testament, that's exactly what Jesus did. Jesus never asked anyone to do something that he didn't do himself. Jesus never told the disciples, I want you to go do something, but I'm going to stay over here because that's kind of beneath me. Never did that, not one time. And this passage is one of the great examples of it. I want you to look at it for just a few minutes with me. John chapter 13. Now, we're at the point now, this is the night before the crucifixion. Remember last Wednesday night we were out in the fellowship hall. We had a great time out there, had a great crowd. I didn't know if we'd have anybody. We had a bigger crowd out there than we've had for a long time. And we talked about the triumphal entry. We talked about Jesus coming to Jerusalem. And then we talked about the fact that what did the Pharisees have to do? They had to turn the crowd. They had to flip the crowd. That's what they've been trying to do for 3 years, flip the crowd. Because over and over and over in the New Testament it says they wanted to take him, they wanted to arrest him, but they were afraid of the crowd. So they had to flip the crowd. And they constantly were trying to do that by asking him these divisive questions, trying to get him to say something that would be unpopular. They could never do it. But Jesus, as we talked about last Wednesday night, he finally did it for them. He flipped the crowd for them. And he did it by coming into Jerusalem, not going to Fort Antonio and throwing Pilate and the rest of the Romans out and reestablishing the nation of Israel. If he had done that, they would have loved him forever. That's what they wanted him to do. But instead, he went to the temple and threw the religious leaders out. And he was making the point, I'm not here for a political revolution. I'm here for a spiritual revolution. And when they saw that he was never going to do what they wanted him to do, the crowd turned on him. And as I said last week, that's still the reason people abandon God and their faith. When God doesn't do something we think he ought to do, if you just go around Calhoun County or any county in the United States, you'll find hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people that were once faithful in church that will no longer go. Dig down far enough, here's the reason you'll find out. God didn't do something they thought he should have done. He didn't answer a prayer the way they thought. He didn't move in a direction they thought. They got frustrated, they got angry, they got put out, and they walked away. That's what happened to the crowd that Sunday. So now we're on Thursday night, we're in the upper room. By the way, the upper room is there on the Temple Mount. There's the temple proper, but there's also these colonnaded buildings, and up there in one of those buildings is the upper room. Now, we know this is the Last Supper. By the way, did the disciples know this was the Last Supper? No, they did this every Passover. This is nothing out of the ordinary yet. Now, it's about to get extraordinary, but it's not there yet. Every Passover, they would go to Jerusalem, he would sit down with them, and they would have the Feast of the Passover. But this night, Jesus starts doing some unusual things. This is the first one. Notice what he does. When Jesus knew that his hour was come, that he should depart out of this world unto the Father, he knows, hey, we're one day away. We're 24 hours away. Having loved his own which were in the world, he loved them unto the end. And supper being ended, the devil having now put into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, to betray him. Now I want you to watch this verse. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he was come from God, and that he went to God. I've said this for a long, long time. One of the things that will give you peace in this life is knowing who you belong to and where you're going. You know why Jesus, even though here's what Jesus knows. Within 24 hours, I'm going to be arrested, beaten, scourged, crucified, and I'll be dead. But you know why he's still at peace? He knows where he came from. He knows where he's going. That always gives peace. Now watch what he does. He rises from supper, laid aside his garments, took a towel, and girded himself. Now you know what he just did? He just took on the clothing of a what? Servant, a slave. Now this is the Son of God taking on the clothing of a slave. Then he poureth water into a basin, began to wash the disciples' feet, and to wipe them with the towel wherewith he was girded. Now, to wash their feet individually, that meant he had to go to each one and do what in front of them? If you're going to wash somebody's feet, what do you got to do? You got to kneel down. Now, this is the Son of God. This is Jesus. This is God incarnate, getting down on his hands and knees in the clothing of a slave. And most women can't appreciate this unless they've been married to a guy. How nasty do men's feet get? Pretty nasty, right? Rosemary and I, most of y'all know, all these years when both of my boys were playing football at Alexandria and when Jeff and Tab's son Brett was playing, we went to a gazillion games together. And we go to all these places. And I remember so many times Rosemary and Tab would come out of the ladies' room and they'd say, oh, that was one of the nastiest bathrooms. Me and Jeff would just look at each other. You have no idea. You have no clue. If you want to know what nasty is, follow a bunch of men around. You know, here's a bunch of guys. And Jesus kneels down in front. Now, you know what? Here's what I love. It was too much for one of them. Then cometh he to Simon Peter. And Peter said unto him, Lord, dost thou wash my feet? I love Simon. You know what? I can't relate to Paul because Paul's this super Christian. But I can kind of relate to Simon. Because you know what he was always doing? Saying the wrong thing at the wrong time. Always sticking his foot in his mouth. Always getting in trouble. But usually what Simon said was what everybody else in the room was thinking. They just didn't have the guts to say it. Most circle of friends, you got somebody like that, right? When you want somebody to say it, but you don't want to be the one, you're looking at that one person that you know has no filter, and they'll say it. That's Simon. Simon looks at Jesus and he says, do you think you're going to wash my feet? Jesus answered and said unto them, what I do, thou knowest not now, but thou shalt know hereafter. Jesus says, Simon, I know you don't understand this right now. But one day you'll understand what I'm doing. But here's good old Simon. I love this. Peter saith unto him, thou shalt never wash my feet. You know what Simon just said to Jesus? No. No. Do you know that Simon Peter is the only person in the New Testament that ever told Jesus no 3 times? I mean, told him no 3 times. No, that is not going to happen. Simon was that kind of guy. Nobody else would say that to Jesus. Nobody else would look at Jesus and say no. But do you remember when Jesus told the disciples, we're going to Jerusalem and they're going to take me and they're going to crucify me? Do you remember what Simon did? He didn't just tell him no. The Bible says he put his hands on Jesus and kind of walked him over to a corner and said, you are not going to do this. You remember what Jesus told him? Get behind me, Satan. He said, Simon, you're trying to stop me from doing what I came to this world to do. But Simon's that guy. Simon is the guy who will do and who will say what everybody else is thinking. Simon is sitting in that chair. And he is looking at the Son of God kneeling down before him, clothed in the clothing of a slave, and about to take Simon's nasty feet and wash them. And Simon says, this is not going to happen. It's like Simon is saying, don't you know who you are? Don't you know who I am? It's not that Simon was trying to be rebellious. Here's what Simon was saying. Lord, I'm not worthy for you to do this. You're the Son of God. I'm a nobody. You need to get up off your knees and you need to quit doing whatever it is you're doing. If anybody needs to wash any feet, let us wash your feet. But I love what Jesus told him. Jesus answered him, if I wash thee not, thou hast no part with me. Now think about those words. Simon looks down at Jesus and he says, look, I don't understand what's going on here, but I'll tell you one thing right now. You will never wash my feet. And Jesus looked up at him and said, Simon, if I don't wash you, you're out. You're out. You have no part with me if you refuse this. You know what Simon's answer to that was? Simon said unto him, Lord, not my feet only, but my hands and my head. He said, wait a second. He said, if this is going to cost me my relationship with you, if this is going to cost me my friendship with you, if this is going to cost me my ability to serve with you, you can not only just wash my feet, you can wash me all over. What Simon was saying is, Lord, I would do anything to not lose this friendship that I have with you, this opportunity that I have to serve with you and be one of your followers. But here's what Simon is saying, but I don't understand what you're doing. You're the Son of God. You shouldn't be doing this. This is a slave's job. Jesus said to him, he that is washed needeth not save to wash his feet, but is clean every whit, and ye are clean, but not all. Now we could go into a long theological discussion about that, and Jesus was saying, hey, you don't need to be reborn. You just need that daily cleansing, and that's the whole import of that verse, but that's not where we're headed tonight. I want to skip on because we're going to run out of time. He said, for he knew who should betray him. Therefore said he, you're not all clean. What was Jesus saying? He said, Simon, you're clean. What he was saying was, your heart is right with God. You're in. But he looked around the room and he said, but not everybody here is. Who was he talking about? Judas. But keep something in mind. Even though Jesus knew Judas was going to betray him, what did Jesus do anyway? He washed Judas's feet. Now let that sink in for a second. Most of us, we're willing to love people who what? Love us. You remember what Jesus said at the Sermon on the Mount? He said, if you only love people who love you, he said, that don't mean anything. He said, even the Pharisees and the tax collectors do that. He said, everybody loves people that love them. He said, he said, I want you to go a step further. I want you to love your enemies. I want you to love those that despitefully use you. I want you, if somebody slaps you on one side of the face, to offer the other cheek. I want you, if somebody compels you to go with them 1 mile, go 2. In other words, Jesus said, I want you to love people in a way that will surprise this world. You know one reason why, and just one. But you know one reason why a lot of people don't have a lot of confidence in Christians and Christianity anymore? They don't see a lot of evidence that we really love people any more than the average person. I mean, Jesus loved with this radical love. With this love where he even would wash the feet of Judas. Now compare that to in the average church, you've got people who won't even shake hands with somebody that they're mad at. And we wonder why the church didn't have the power it had 2,000 years ago. Jesus said, you're not all clean, thinking about Judas, but he still washed all their feet. So after he had washed their feet and taken his garments and was set down again, here comes the payoff to this whole deal. Watch this. He said unto them, know ye what I have done to you? In other words, he washes all their feet. He puts his clothes back on. He sits down. And they're all sitting there. Listen, you could hear a pin drop in that room. And Jesus says, do you guys understand what just happened? Do you really understand what just happened? Now, if you're familiar with the disciples, this is not the first time Jesus asked questions like this. How many times did Jesus tell a parable? And he would look at the 12. There would be a crowd there, but he would look at the 12 and he would say, do you get it? What would they always say without fail? Yes, Lord, yes. And then so many times later in the day or whenever the crowd would leave, you remember what they would do? They'd come back and say, we didn't really get it. Can you tell that again? You know, there were so many times they didn't understand. You remember that time, we talked about it 1,000 times, but you remember that time when they're in the boat and they're going across the Sea of Galilee and Jesus is trying to warn them about false teaching of the Pharisees? And he uses the idea of leaven. You know, it's like the yeast that you put in bread. You only have to put in a little and it spreads. And Jesus is saying that's the way false teaching is. All it takes is a little to corrupt the whole thing. And he starts talking about leaven. You remember what the disciples started whispering to each other? Oh, he's mad because we forgot the bread. And Jesus is like, I'm not talking about bread. I'm talking about false teaching. That's an example. I'm just giving you a visual of what I'm talking about the import. So over and over and over again, he would do something or say something or tell a story, and he would say, do you understand what I just said or what I just did? So this night is no different in that regard. He finishes and he gets dressed and he sits down and he says, do you understand what just happened? Rather than waiting for them, because I think this was one of those times, it was so important. I think rather than waiting for an answer, because you know what I think Jesus knew they would say? Yes, we get it. He was like, I know you didn't, so let me just explain. Now listen to what he tells them. Ye call me Master and Lord. Now as we've said many times down through the years, I love the King James. I love the beauty of the language, among other things. That word ye is plural. As I've often said, if there was a southern translation of the Bible, what would that word be? Y'all. If we were up north, it would be you guys. Y'all sounds so much better. He says, ye, all of you, call me Master and Lord. And you say, well, for so I am. Now let those words again sink in. He sits down and he says, listen, you guys call me Master and you call me Lord. He said, that's good because that's who I am. I am the Lord. By the way, the word Lord, when you call somebody Lord, what you're saying is, you're the ruler of my life. Whatever you say, I do. Do you remember the last time Peter ever told Jesus no? It was in a vision. Jesus already gone back to heaven. It's in Acts 10, I think, if I remember right. Peter's up on the roof and he sees that vision. This is all about Gentile salvation. And he sees this table of food coming down. And at first it looks good. He starts listing off some of the, and it sounds, but then he notices there's bugs and insects and all this stuff. And God tells him, rise and eat. Remember what Peter said? No, but think about the word. He said, no, Lord. Those two words don't go together. That's an oxymoron. Those are two words that cancel each other out. You can't say, no, Lord. Here's what you're saying. You're the ruler of my life. Whatever you say goes, but in this case, no. That's what Simon just said. Jesus tells them on this occasion, I am the Master. I am the Lord. I am who you think I am. But no, watch the payoff. If I then, your Lord and Master have washed your feet, ye also ought to wash one another's feet. Here's what Jesus was saying. He was saying, if I'm the Son of God, and I can humble myself to serve you, you know what I want you to do? Humble yourself to serve others. Now, I know there's people that take this and say, okay, we all got to have foot washing and all that. That's really not the point of what Jesus was saying. The point of this illustration, the point of this activity was, he was saying, if I'm willing to humble myself even to the point of serving you by washing your feet, and I'm the Son of God, he says, I don't want you to ever think you're so up here that you can't humble yourself and serve somebody else. By the way, who did that stand in stark contrast to? Jesus being willing to humble himself. Who did that stand in stark contrast to? The religious leaders of his day, the Pharisees in particular. You remember, we've talked about it so many times, the Pharisee and the tax collector standing side by side, they're going to pray. You remember the first words that came out of the Pharisee's mouth? God, I'm thankful that I'm what? Glad I'm not like that guy. But you know what? How much of that goes on in church today? So, preacher, I'd never say it. We might not say it. But if somebody walks in and they don't look just right, or they don't smell just right, or they don't just seem to fit in with what we think people are, how many of us will just go back and shake a hand and welcome them? You think Jesus would have? I know he would. You know why? He humbled himself even to the point of washing the feet of the man who would betray him. And he said, guys, if I'm willing to do that, watch this. Here's the last verse. I have given you a what? An example. That ye should do as I have done. That is leading by example. You know what Jesus didn't say? He didn't say, now from this point forward, I want you guys to be willing to serve each other and humble yourself and watch each other's feet. Now, I'm not going to actually get down and do it myself because, I am the Son of God, but I want you all to do that. That's not what he did. He got down on his hands and knees and picked up each one of their feet, even Judas, and washed it. And then he said, now I've given you an example. I want you to do like I've done. Jesus never asked anybody to do something he wasn't willing to do himself. That is leading by example. That is powerful. And that's why every pastor, me especially, you know what my number one goal should be? To try and lead by example. Not to tell people to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. That is not the example that I want to set. That's not the example Jesus set. And we don't want to set that example on our job. We don't want to set that example in our home. We don't want to set that example anywhere. Whatever road life takes you on, lead by example. Don't ask other people to do something you're not willing to do yourself and to jump in and be a part of. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this great story. Thank you even more for a great Savior who was willing to lead by example, who showed us what to do, not by telling us what to do, but by doing it himself. Father, you taught us to love people with this new, amazing type of love that looks beyond their faults, beyond their failures, beyond who they are. God, help us to be that way. Help us to try and see people the way you see people. Help us to try and love people the way you love people. God, help us to be the people that you would have us to be. Now, with every head bowed, in a moment we're going to stand and we're going to